Welcome to another 15-minute feature Friday. This week we're going to kind of cover a mishmash of different things, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. I was searching for a topic to cover, and I really wanted to cover something that was new in 2019 R1. But when I started looking at the different things that were in 2019 R1, I didn't really want to tackle many of them. I wasn't daring enough to go over encryption in 15 minutes. The audio support is interesting, but thought would be kind of challenging to demo in a webinar. So then I noticed there was a very small afterthought that wasn't even covered in the original tech brief or the original announcement. It was only covered in the tech briefing, and it was covered at the very end. And that's the improvements to the ad hardware wizard. And that's actually a pretty big deal if you've been playing with Milestone for a while. So there were some improvements to the add hardware wizard, also the replace hardware wizard, which I think is even more so important. And then I don't know how long exactly that's going to take to go over. And then I'm going to kind of go over some stuff I like to talk about in design sessions around device groups and device management. So that's my super long PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to jump straight into the management client. If you've been playing with Milestone for a while, you know adding in cameras and moreover replacing cameras was somewhat of a challenge, mostly because devices are usually coded through device drivers that are similar across multiple devices, and especially true for access devices. And what I mean by this is you might end up with like an 8-channel device that has 7 channels that don't do anything, or you might have a lot of different outputs that are virtual outputs in access. So I'm going to walk you through the new device add hardware wizard. And I have a camera ready to go, so I'm just going to go through manual. Password's already stored for me, and I'm adding in a Bosch camera here. So this camera is, I already know the IP address. Well, yeah, yeah. And the big difference here, once this finishes, it's hold music or something. Here we go. The big difference here are these check boxes across the top. They don't look that important, but when you're adding in multiple cameras, when using, let's say, Express Scan or using a manual scan, the way the behavior used to work is each camera would come in enabled, and every component associated with that would come in enabled. That required you to basically come through and have to uncheck each individual device you didn't want to bring in. So if you didn't want to bring in speakers and metadata ports or inputs or outputs, you'd have to go through and uncheck each individual item. Now we have the ability to come in here and just say, okay, I want to turn on all speakers for every camera I'm adding. And if you're strategic enough in the way you're adding your devices to your system, this can be very beneficial. Additionally, a little known, I don't want to say a little known feature, but something that's definitely a surprise to new users of Milestone is the ability to name your cameras at this stage too. And this is actually the best place to name your cameras. So if you want to name your camera here, I'm just going to call this test camera. You'll notice it updates not only the hardware name, but also all of the associated devices with that. And this is the only place within Milestone you can actually do that, is during the add phase, is update all of the different devices. If you do it later, you have to update the hardware name and then come back and update the camera name, the microphone, speaker name, etc. So once that's done, we've utilized these new checkboxes that have been added in R1. We can add to a device group. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and add this to a device group I created earlier that I've called new cameras. And this is actually something I recommend everybody do if they want to actually utilize device groups, is create a temporary folder you add all of your new cameras to. That way, they're somewhere centralized that you can get to. You know they need to be sorted because they're still in there. And we'll come back to it a little bit. So I'm going to add it to the new camera folder and hit finish. So my camera's in here. My test camera is in here. I'm under recording server, so I see all the different components. But if I come under my devices section under cameras, you'll see I have my one new camera inside of the test cameras folder, or inside of the new camera folder. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. I want to continue on kind of the what's new in the 2019 R1 release. I said the add hardware wizard changed, but I also said the replace hardware wizard changed. And more appropriately, let's use a camera that has a lot of these virtual outputs. You'll notice there's 34 of these virtual outputs. Well, they're not all virtual, but there's 34 outputs that are in here. And if I do a replace hardware, let's say I need to replace the camera with a like model camera or even a different model camera, or I'm utilizing the new Access dynamic device drivers. I can do a replace hardware. Same address, same port, same username, same password, same camera driver. So I'm just going to leave everything the same. If I needed to, I could go up and do auto detect and make it auto detect again. But I'm just going to go ahead and continue. And the big difference, what we're going to see here once this adds in, is that I have to do a lot less work than I used to. So what used to happen is I would come in here and everything would be set to select device. So I would have to go down through 8 camera sections, microphone section, speaker section, metadata section, and all 34 of the outputs, and basically either down arrow or use tab or get very creative in selecting all of these. And if you had to replace multiple cameras, you could spend at least maybe 2 or 3 minutes on each camera. And I know support feels that pain. So now everything has been basically selected automatically for me, and I can just go ahead and hit next. So there's almost nothing to do with our replace hardware anymore. So those are kind of 2 really good features that were added to 2019 R1 that were very kind of hidden features that weren't advertised greatly. But for existing milestone customers looking to upgrade, maybe justifying renewing their care, that's definitely something that that really will benefit an administrator. So the second part of this has nothing to do with 2019 R1, but it's something I like to talk about when we go through design sessions. And that's how we add cameras to the system and how we design our device groups. Device groups are very, very useful. And I think we don't emphasize enough how useful they can be. They can be used for permissions. So I can assign permissions in a role to a specific device group. So if I went down to a role, went to my test user, I go to overall secure. I don't want to go to overall security, but I go to devices. I can say I want to give this user basically read access, view live, and playback to this entire device group. So they can be used for permission purposes, but moreover, they can be used for administration purposes and also for rule purposes. So, and those can have different effects. So when we added the camera to the system, we can only add the camera to one device group. And this, I think a lot of users think we're limited to one device group, but that's not true. We can actually add a device to as many device groups as we wish. We just have to do it after the fact. And because of that, that's why I suggest adding them to a temporary folder, either one you keep in there that's called new cameras or just one you create on the fly all the time. So I have this test camera I've added. It belongs to nothing else. I've created this 15-minute feature Friday group, and this is the camera that's in my lab. So I want to go ahead and add it to the indoor location inside, and I just have to right-click, edit device group members, and I'll find my new cameras group, and I'll just move that over. One annoying thing about the way device groups are handled is we still have to go back to the new camera group and remove it from there. But this is actually good because I also want to add this to a device type. So under my device types, I've created some different folders. I have an Access manufacturer folder and I have a Bosch folder. So I'm going to add this to my Bosch folder as well. Go up to new cameras, test camera, add. And now I can go ahead and remove the test camera from that new camera because I've added it to all the groups I want to add it to. So why did I do this? Why have I separated it this way? Well, like I said, groups are very good for creating permissions. So if I wanted to create a permission and give a user access to all my indoor or outdoor cameras, that's fine. However, if I want to make changes across multiple cameras, if I click on a single camera, you'll notice I have options to change the resolution, to change the frame rate, to change zip stream settings, the codec, etc. But if I click on the group as a whole, which has different model cameras inside of it, you notice a lot of those options went away. Actually, almost every single option went away. There is a drop down at the top up here that allows us to select the specific drivers that are inside of it. So the Axis One channel now allows me to change all of my cameras that are using that one channel. The Axis or the Bosch One channel as well will allow me to change all the Bosch One channels. However, you're going to notice something about the Axis 8 channel is I get a lot of options. I can change. I can't change frame rate. I can change compression settings. I can change zip stream settings, but I can't change the resolution and I can't change the frame rate. And that's because those settings aren't like across the entire Axis 8 channel group. Those camera models that are inside of there differ. So because of that, I usually recommend you create a device group based on type or model number, even if you have only a few types of models. And in here, I've basically separated out all the different drivers. So if I go up to Axis again, I can change a lot of the settings across Axis as a whole. I can still do the drop down at the top and allow me to change by driver, but I still can't change resolution or frame rate. So by creating a folder for my one channel, for my 720p channels, for my 2-channel 4 megapixel, and even for my 5 megapixel, I can change all of the settings for all of the cameras inside of there. But again, I get back to that 8 channel, and I can't change that resolution for the. I can't change the resolution. I can't change the frame rate, however, which is kind of interesting because I couldn't do that at the drop down. So what I've done is I've basically separated out by model. I have 2 cameras inside of this A folder that are like in settings, so I can change resolution and frame rate, and my B camera as well. I can change resolution and frame rate, but when they're combined together, which is what they are in here, all 3 cameras are inside of here, I can't change them. So device groups are very useful for administration as well. And once you realize how they can be used for making mass configuration changes, they can be very handy. Additionally, a user actually can have some insight into what's going on here, but we can turn that off in Smart Client Profiles. So I do recommend users create multiple device groups for administration purposes, for permission purposes, and even rule purposes. And all 3 of those can be used. So, just because it's fresh in my mind, we've been doing some comparisons against Genetec, and one of the things I did was actually this kind of work on settings comparisons. I found that their setting limitations are very similar to ours, and our device group structure actually allows it to be more flexible. So as long as you use device groups properly, we actually probably have a competitive advantage against Genetec, at least from my limited experience on that. However, they do have kind of an advantage on naming. So I did say that the only place we can really change a name across an entire device or an entire piece of hardware is from the Add Hardware wizard. They actually have a little wizard that will change everything for them. So they have an advantage there. So any questions? I think that's about it. It took up 15 minutes. I'm kind of happy about that. All right. So if there's no questions, I'll wrap it up there.